Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2016, presents INTERPHEX Live.
Okay, good morning, New York. All right, we're on third day here, INTERPHEX Live. So today, being the last day, we got a couple of sessions where we've decided to change it up a little bit, and it'll be a one-on-one conversation more than a panel discussion. And we figured if that's the route we're gonna take, we might as well take a walk down memory lane in certain cases. So as it turns out, in my real life, we've done a lot of tech transfer, and but who wants to listen to me? So we got a good friend of mine. I guess we've been transferring products together. It's got to be over 30 years now. So we're going to talk a little bit about technology transfer. This is Chris Haas.
Good morning.
And we're going to start off, and I think what we're going to look at is some of the challenges around tech transfer. I think one of the things that always kind of upsets me is that tech transfer is sort of looked at as the grand finale. It's like when all the non-combatants show up and you got to put up the bleacher seats for the last 3 batches. That's not, there's a lot more to it. Over the years, it's changed. So these are the things that we're going to talk about. These are lessons that are, shall we say, hard fought and painful. So I think most importantly, why don't we start with the main challenges that we face in today's environment, tech transfer, Chris? What has been your experience?
It's really the challenge for tech transfer is usually the timeline. There's tremendous pressure to launch a product as quick as possible. And my experience is that more and more people try to overlook data and just try to push the submission forward to get the approval as quick as possible. I just experienced that with quite a few clients of mine, that they really ignored data. And the problem with that, when you ignore data, it bites you sooner or later. Because if you don't correct the issues that you have during your tech transfer and validation, and you launch the product, the trouble is that it will get worse. So you better fix it before you get into the validation. That's a big challenge that marketing, corporate is pushing, and really doesn't give you the material and the time to do a decent job.
So, yeah, obviously there's mistakes that are made. So what would you say are some of the biggest mistakes and the categories they fit into?
The biggest mistakes, you mean with regard to overlooking data?
Overlooking data, overthinking it.
Overlooking performance.
Mm-hmm.
It's, you know, when a tablet laminates during your scale up and tech transfer, and you just say, yeah, it will go away eventually. You launch the product, and you know, within 6 months, you get complaints, and the FDA knocks on the door and says, you had 15 complaints in 1 month. They really don't care if you sold 7 million or 1 million tablets or more. 15 complaints or 15 complaints, and you're in trouble. Mm-hmm. So you better fix that kind of problems before you launch.
Yeah, well, that goes back to the old adage. Little problems just become big problems. I mean, there's no such thing as a minor issue. What about, I find that a lot of people overstaff. We're going to take questions at the end, if you don't mind. Is that okay? Sound good?
That's fine. Whatever.
You got to remember, I gotta stick with the script for a while. Okay. Okay. Sorry about that. All right. So we're going to talk about. Now you threw me off. Where am I at? Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Okay. So what I wanted to talk about is one of my pet peeves is the managerial approach. What I find essentially is they throw a lot of people at things, where essentially it's just mismanaged, or worse yet, it's overstaffed, worse yet, and it's not the right people. So let's talk about the mega teams for a minute.
Oh, sure, yeah. Just a quick example that I experienced literally 10 days ago, and I was just amazed. And I'm not talking far away from here. It's actually in the Western universe. Where I was called in to mediate and help out for a tech transfer, and it was kind of a reverse tech transfer where the company brought the product in from contract manufacturing operations, and it was a thermally sterilized process. And so they called me in and says, can you help us out, because we tried 3 times to validate the process and we failed 3 times. I said, oh, that's interesting. So what exactly happened and how is the process designed at your contract manufacturer? Then they said, oh, we are not allowed to talk to them. And they said, excuse me? So they said, oh no, only corporate can talk to the contract manufacturer, and then the corporate gives us the information. So, you know, there are at least 2 or 3 handovers and you lose the information. So I think key is that you have a well-designed team that sticks together and is responsible for the tech transfers. So, and really key is you have a good project manager, and you also have capable colleagues from each category for the analytical method transfer, for the process, for regulatory aspects, raw materials, procurement. However, don't venture out into these monster mega teams where 40, 50 people sit for 5 hours in one room and your portion is just 5 minutes. You really have to subdivide and have a core team that runs the project from a let's say, strategic point of view, and then you have the tactical sub-teams that really do the legwork on the floor and in the lab.
I think the other thing is you have to enable the people. Invariably, people think because they have a quality agreement or they have an agreement with the target site. And this is true whether it's an internal transfer or an external transfer. And what we're sharing is experience that, you know, both Chris and I were at Novartis for many, many years. What we found eventually is that we not only needed a quality agreement, we needed a working agreement. The working agreement essentially meant the boots on the ground. This is the rules of engagement. This is how we're going to do it. Otherwise, you get into the situation, and it's a very real situation. You got something that goes sideways during the process, and the default is the way they do business, which is in the case of Novartis, that's crap. We're going to do it our way or no way, because we're accountable for this. As it turns out, you know, this was not the rules of engagement that we had already put in. So sending you guys into an environment like that, be it an off-site or a CMO or whatever, that's very, very, and it's something that's very often overlooked. So when we go in, we do a quality agreement, and then we do what's called a working agreement, so that the rules of engagement are very clearly set out. What about timelines? I mean, I've seen all kinds of numbers. So what if you're going to be transferring to a CMO or whatever? What do you think? Let's talk about under the environment we're talking. Big pharma and CMO. Are there any differences in timing or?
No, usually the timelines are given because you have milestones that are you can't move them. You can't make 6-month stability is a 6-month stability, or 12-month stability is a 12-month stability. So those are timelines. It's kind of like the joke, you know, you can't take 9 women and put them in, and you get a baby in 1 month. So making a baby just takes 9 months, period.
So that doesn't work? That's one on me,
no,
man. Okay.
The timelines, I would say, if you really want to do it right, and as I said, don't overlook the data, believe the data, have the milestones, have the checkpoints to review the data, that you have confidence that as you go forward, you have a robust, reproducible process. So I would say anywhere between 24 and 30 months for a tech transfer, unless you have a real highly complex process. Could be an aseptic, lyophilized process where it could take you longer, because I remember we had one process where the lyophilization cycle was over 100 hours. So that was some challenges too.
You know, one of the things that I always, you know, the timeline was one thing, it's the numbers. And the reason I say that, You know, at Novartis, one of the things that we were famous for was combining X product with product Y, and we would always come up with fixed combinations. And it was a strategy. So, you know, we were looking at 6 tech transfers a year, and I mean, that could really drain you out. So now that you've been around in different companies, what has been your experience in that area? How many?
How many? It's really how many resources you can throw at it. And it really depends on what stage is the company. Do they want to transfer out some older products to free up capacity at home for the newer high-selling products? So you can have 8, 10 tech transfers. Sometimes you substitute that by getting temporary help in, which, you know, it can work. The problem is when you get temporary help in, consultants, technicians and whatnot, the problem is that once the project is complete, they leave, so the knowledge leaves. So if you bring temporary help in, make sure that you have somebody that works with them very closely so that the whole knowledge build-up is retained in the company that owns the product.
And that's the same, you know, I think our experience has been when we're going to go to a contractor, internal transfers versus a transfer to somebody who's a partner but not necessarily part of the firm. I mean, I've seen a range of different things that happen. You know, I think you and I think one of the most horrific I've seen to date was, you know, we'll put together, you know, 5 batches pre-weighed, you know, set this stuff off, put it in an air freight container, show up the next day and the guys are reweighing the batches, mixing the batches, and it's like, what happened? That's so, taking stuff offshore seems to have its own problems, you know, no matter how many agreements and you have. What has been your experience?
I think your best bet, you need a man in the plant. You have to have somebody on the ground and just, you know, give him guidance, supervise the activities. Yeah, I know what you mean. You know, things like weighing the drum with the lid and weighing the drum without the lid can throw you off. And it can take you a couple of weeks to find out what exactly happened. And could be also a language barrier sometimes where, you know, to put the lid on the scale translates in a different way.
I think the issue being, you know, I mean, you can take nothing for granted. I mean, to the point where the example, you know, the example we're talking about, actually, we called it the terrace and tapa effect. In that particular case was the lid versus no lid phenomena, otherwise better known as the low assay problem. Well, if it turns out that, you know, your procedures out in the weigh areas to weigh with or without lids, and your numbers are off, your numbers are going to be off mysteriously by the weight of the lid in the ring. But more importantly, I mean, and these things are not, that's to the point of minutia that you don't expect is going to cause you a problem. But I mean, to the point where did you even read the batch record? I mean, people forget that. They talk about, you know, quality by design, knowledge transfer, and the stuff that kills you, especially if you're the guy down there running it, is the stuff that you don't tell them. So that's where the man in the plant, more importantly, the conversation between those people and yourselves have to be very detailed, okay? Otherwise, you're heading for a disaster,
Right.
Okay? Now,
and remember, they also can be very creative. We had one transfer where at the end of packaging, there was always about 102, 103% yield. And I said, wow, how did they create mass? Interesting. And then we looked at the analytical data and saw the assay was okay, but it was always a little bit low. Now, lo and behold, they got paid by the tablet and the bottle. So what they did to increase their yield, they ran the tablet compression at the lower end to get more tablets out. And it took us a while to find that one out. So it's really important to have people in the plant that know the process and also have, as you said before, the authority and the responsibility to intervene when that kind of occurrences happen.
Okay, let's look at another. One of the things I always try to, I'm saying, did I sleep through something? Did I miss some kind of regulation or change? So, I think as we had talked about, if you look over the last 20 years, the regulations, rules, and when it's specific to what we're talking about, has these things changed? I mean, has this become, more burdensome, less burdensome, what?
I don't think it became burdensome. I mean, the pharmaceutical industry has always been a heavily regulated industry, and I think if you follow the rules, if you play the game by the rules, you shouldn't be in trouble. The good thing is a lot of companies sometimes try to cut corners, and that generates work for consultants. Just kidding.
I forgot about that part. Yeah, okay. All right. Ouch. So, but I think one of the things that, and this is something that we had talked to the folks a couple of times about, was the concern now about the data transfers and the way and mechanisms that these data, in other words, you're going to, it's an away game, all right? Let's remember that. Even if you're, maybe you're going to be within the confines, if you're a global player, you may be going to another place, but for the most times, these are away games. So the question really comes back about other systems, data transfer, data integrity. What has been your experience recently with, like, for example, cloud-based data?
Honestly, I haven't been really involved in that aspect.
Okay. One of the things that we were talking about too is, and the guys here, we had them, and they gave a discussion on actual reality and virtual reality. I see this was one of the things is, how many times have we sat there trying to make things work over a cellular phone? But this was, you talk about man in a plant. The trouble is you're always down to the point where it's the man in the plant. He's working on it, but if the team is sitting someplace in New Jersey and these guys sitting someplace in wherever, the communications, either he's got to turn it into some kind of a report, he's got to talk to you. The guys with the actual reality, there was a secure network. In fact, the way it was that if anybody had looked at the presentation, they were saying that they can hold 18 hours of solid data without even doing a transmission. So in other words, the guy goes in, he can do the triage, they see everything, can look at everything that he sees. All right, and then what he does when he comes back, assuming he has connectivity, it could be real time, or if he's in a situation where it's not a secure link, he comes out and they can, then he uploads all this information to a team back home. So essentially, the team there and all of the resources see that. I see that coming along pretty well. I thought that was a pretty neat way of doing it. And apparently this is, it gets back to pipeline, guys building pipelines. This is a lot of the work they do, and they were using that. So I see that as a real positive. So what about, you talked about some cost cutting. So what about efficiencies, cost cuttings, and do these things complicate? These must complicate the tech transfer thing, or what are we doing?
The cost cutting aspect just comes into play when you don't get sufficient material to execute enough experimental batches. That's where the tech transfer team runs into problems, and you really have to make a good argument again with presenting the data that additional batches are required. Otherwise, you just can't defend the robustness of the process.
I think, and that gets back to one of the other points we were making today, or not today, but yesterday, was the inability to institutionalize knowledge. In other words, a lot of times what we see is the tech transfer team may be an operational thing, whereas the process itself emanates from the development side. And it's a, throw it over the wall. I was a little bit surprised to hear that still exists in some companies. It's a continuum. I think anybody who's ever done this knows it's a continuum. Anybody who thinks otherwise is an idiot. Sorry, but so if to me, the the lead up, that lead up should be almost a no-brainer by the time you're at the away game.
Right. Yeah, but I think we were ahead of the times, because when you were in research and development and I presented technical operations, we teamed up back, as I said, in 1989 and did tech transfers and ensured that seamless transfer, scale up, and that there was a true handshake.
Yeah.
And I think that's really key for a good technology transfer, that you have a seamless transition from the 50 to the 100 to the 500 to 750 kilogram batch size and whatnot.
Yeah.
Because if you don't have that, and if you don't share the knowledge and the data, then you set yourself up for trouble.
I think one of the things, and I've probably talked about tech transfer to groups almost to the point where, people are, is that what you're going to talk about again? No. Okay. But anyway, one of the things I found was this knowledge. And to be honest, because, being a tech nut myself, I stepped back and I said, is there some piece that I'm missing? Invariably, I've walked into facilities, we've done stuff, and it's like, well, how the hell could that have happened? What I found was, if you look at this whole thing as knowledge, and especially in the time of QBD, and one of the things I've talked about and repeated, knowledge itself in other industries, or knowledge itself when you look at it from an academic standpoint, is broken down into three types. All right, there is explicit knowledge, which is the stuff you read, right? It's written down, it's in a notebook, it's in a manual. That's the stuff we live with. All right, there's institutional knowledge. That's the stuff that we work from. And one of the things I heard a couple of times at our panel discussions was, and I thought that by this time it doesn't exist anymore, but it does, and that is the tacit knowledge. Tacit knowledge is considered sticky knowledge. I think we got a rather mature audience here, so you'll all remember, I'll relate a story, so how tacit knowledge is. Real simple, right? You get a call from ops, and looks like our blockbuster drug just went sideways. It's capping like crazy, and okay, you got to come down and take a look at it. Well, you start looking at it. There's no rational reason as to how this happens. You start looking at it and looking at it, and I don't know about the rest of you. Eventually, I get so desperate, I start looking to see who signed off on the batch records. And as it turns out, Tom seems to be the guy who signs off. And the last time we had a kappa on this, looks like Tom was on there too. Well, you go to talk to Tom, and or even the reverse, you don't talk to, you talk to everybody else, and then you talk to Tom. It turns out, well, that's not really the way I run it. What do you mean it's not the way you run it? In other words, this is how I set it up. This is what I put into the logic. This is how Tom puts it in. That, my friends, that's the landmine that's considered tacit knowledge. How the hell did that happen? And it still happens. We sat here talking about serialization the other day. And as I'm talking, this guy's talking all this high-tech stuff and aggregation and being able to tell you what tablet went in what state. The guy who's actually doing the guy who's actually packaging this stuff said, yeah, well, as it turns out, at first we had a little bit of problem because we found that, this operator really would set it up this way. And I'm like, I thought this had ended, 10 years ago. Apparently not. So thank God for that, and thank God for the consulting community. So, my recommendation is simple. Don't have to pay anybody anything. The answer is, we found was the only way you do it, you put down, and you don't want SOPs. Because then we all know what happens then. You don't update them and you don't document them. No, you didn't follow the SOP. So we very deftly called it a handbook. All right, so we write a handbook. And what that is, it's a mental download. Okay, so we make sure that every product has a legacy. And that legacy resides in the handbook. Then there's the regulated aspects and the non-regulated aspects. It's not that you're hiding anything, it's that you've learned something. So let's get back to the launch site, target site. So these working agreements, what has been your experience when you get in the site? Obviously, you've done a lot of offshore work. So, have you found that you're welcomed with open arms, or what? What's the deal?
Yeah, oh yeah, absolutely. No, in general, I think the receiving side appreciates the support they can get, and that they reach out to really draw the knowledge from the transferring side. And I think it's key that there is a good chemistry between the transferring side and the receiving side. If there are other reasons that because the material is being transferred, because the facility is being closed, and the receiving side, of course, they have an interest to get the process. On the other hand, the transferring side doesn't want to let loose. That's when you have managerial issues, and you got to address that with training, with probably even bringing in somebody from the outside executing the process.
So when we talk about a core team, I mean, most companies run things as a project team, right? That means that everybody that represents every piece there, right? So where's the core team fit in on the project team? What would that be? Is that the tech, is that still a cross-functional? Is that, now we're talking about across the technical side? Or what is the core team comprised of?
Oh, a core team, as I said, a core team should have all the relevant departments represented. So we are talking about the analytical method transfer, so you need somebody from quality. Of course, you have manufacturing for the process from the transfer and the receiving side. You have a regulatory person that participates, also looking at if you want to expedite the transfer, make sure you don't make a lot of changes or changes that are outside the filed guidelines, because that gets you in trouble too. Invariantly, will at least extend the stability data or the whole data package and justifications. So you have somebody from regulatory, as I said, a project manager is on the team, and you also might want sometimes engineering when there's equipment transfers associated with it, IQs, OQs, PQs to be performed. So it's really anything that falls under technical operations when it's a site-to-site transfer. Any department that is within a technical operations should be represented. You have technical training if there is no new piece of equipment, or if there is also the training on the new process for the operators. And if it's a new product introduction, as we said before, of course, the development department is a part. The analytical methods development department is part, because that then they represent the transferring side, so to speak, and the receiving side is technical operations. But I really don't see a big difference if it's a side-to-side transfer or if it's a new product introduction. The elements are the same.
I get the site to site. We were, that's what Novartis lived on. But how about if I got to pick a site? Who do we send then? The real estate guy? I mean, to me, this is where the big screw up usually happens. We look at a site. So who goes out, looks at it, and says, yeah, or what does that look like? What kind of a team do you send out?
Basically, most companies these days have technical services organization that really help out operations, and technical services together with procurement or they usually go out and evaluate the receiving sites, especially when it's a contractor. You go look at the sites, what are the capabilities, how good is the match to your current process, what is their equipment that you might consider for your process, how well is it a match, how many process changes we might have to do. or is it a like-for-like, straightforward transfer? And also then comes the financial aspect, where you look at how much do they charge you per tablet.
Yeah.
And, quite a few companies engage in a kind of a Kepner-Traeger evaluation model, where you look at 4 or 5 different contractors that potentially could do your process, and you do the must-haves and nice-to-haves, and you list that up and you get a score. And it really helps, although it's not the end all. You have to look at the history of their GMP compliance. Did they have FDA visits? Are they FDA compliant? Are they EMEA compliant, especially when you have a product that is sold globally? I mean, you might look at the Japanese. Did they have a visit from the Japanese and also from Brazil? So those are the regulatory aspects that are very important, because you can transfer it and then later on you realize they are at the brink of a warning letter. It's probably not the right company to go to.
One of the things I've found too, Chris, was, and I think you and I have shared the pain on this a couple of times, is invariably the thing that really comes back and bites you. We drill into the regulatory, we drill into it's what about the infrastructure? Who's looking at the infrastructure? That is, right down to what zip code are we in, right? So the answer is, who looks at that? Is that somebody in engineering, or what do we do?
I think it's probably the technical services organization with procurement goes for a first visit. I had the case where we visited a potential CMO, and we walked into that and we said, whoa, that's about 40 years old. And yeah, you're absolutely right. You look at these pieces of equipment and say, you ask, when did you service that fluid bed dryer the last time? And so if you have some doubts about that, you definitely bring your engineering department with you for a second visit to look at the maintenance records. How old is the equipment? Has it been serviced? Were there significant, let's say, problems with the piece of equipment? Also, when you talk infrastructure, how is the water system? What kind of a water system is there? How is it being sanitized? How is it being maintained? If you need any other kind of gases, nitrogen, or other gas distribution systems, you look at that. You might also look at the overall facility HVAC setup, HEPA filters. Do they really service the HEPA filters? So there is a whole checklist that you can go through, and just make you feel comfortable that the company really knows how to run the facility. And believe it or not, you can find certain things where you say, really?
Yeah, having said all of that, I think one of the, I haven't categorized them into biggest disaster, smallest disaster, but anyway, you walk into a room, literally you got to make sure the light's light, right? And we just heard, you got to make sure where the water's coming from. And I don't have to tell you, obviously we've been around the block a few times, all of us. In many countries, is the water, right? Not only that, is the water going to be coming on a regular basis? But let me explain one other thing. So we thought we had pretty much airtight. So we went back, you do it, and what I recommend is you do a barometer check, right? You go in, we're humming along, right? You go back in 2 months to see, we should be at stasis, right? And everything looks good. The analytical data is coming in. In fact, these guys are doing a better job than we did, right? But, so you go down and, it's all about throughput, right? Because it's going to be a lead up to continuous, but right now it's a specific story. So we go down and we walk in and notice, first thing that strikes me is that in one process, they were moving all of the wash water with a vacuum. Interesting, considering we spent a lot of money putting in clean in place in the systems and all. Remember, we went in and literally redid the infrastructure for this very reason. Odd, right? I mean, why would you spend the money, right? And they're taking the water out in a vacuum. As we walk into the room, and I'll never forget this, and I relate this to everybody because it's something you don't think about. As I walk into the room, and I hadn't noticed it until I was standing there, I'm looking and thought maybe that there was a problem. I noticed that floor drains were also sealed up. I'm thinking to myself, this can't be good. So we get down and this, so we start to talk. To me, I start with the guy who's got his hands in the water, right? So I said, what is going on here? Well, he said, well, we can't put the water in the sewer anymore. So you got a water treatment plant. Yeah. And obviously, I'm not going to get that answer from him. So you go back. As it turns out, the water treatment plant we put in, on top of their water treatment plant, did not account for the solids that we were in our effluent. In fact, it's not only the concentration of the solids, it's what the solids were. Now, where the hell were you when I told you the formulation? All right? Everybody sat in a room, we all looked at this, we all knew what the formula was, we all knew what the pigments were, and now you're telling me you can't put it out there? Now, a lot of engineers out there, I'm just a poor little tablet maker, right? I don't have to tell you what a restructure on a water treatment facility is going to cost you. That's as good as me introducing a process that doesn't run. And how the hell did that happen? And honestly, that's why we led up to this, why we held your question. We've done all of this stuff, and there it is. Taped up drains, best yet, the drums had to be shipped out. And we're talking about water, right? And we're shipping water like it was a drug. I mean, are we for real or what? So needless to say, beyond my complete amazement, and as you can tell, I'm a pretty quiet guy, so needless to say, it didn't really go down well with me. And I made sure that everybody shared my discomfort, But I'm like, how the hell could this happen? How could a tech let's be realistic. So, Johnson & Johnson or Janssen sends a team down. You're going to make sure that you have, you got a guy who knows about effluent and sewage? I mean, that should have been done up front. Somebody should have figured that one out, right? Here we are 2 years later, and we're drumming the water because we can't use the water treatment plant. I can tell you now that when I go to facilities like that, the first thing on my agenda is I want to go out and see the water treatment plant because I know somebody's going to screw me on that one. So we got a few more minutes. Again, the basis of this was we could talk tech transfer. I could tell you how to write protocols. That's all crap. What I found was the most important thing about tech transfer is talk to the guys that wear the scars and figure out, what was the most recent thing that you stepped on and it blew up?
Tech transfer, I mean, there's nothing magic to tech transfer. But what I'm amazed, especially we are now in the 21st century, and tech transfer has been around. There are companies that teach tech transfer. They teach you how to set up. But what I experienced in the last, let's say, 6 to 9 months, how pharmaceutical companies still in the 21st century operate, I just shake my head. I mean, people, it's really simple. Talk to each other, share the information, raise issues early, and really just interact, keep an open mind, because if you don't do that, I mean, the company that says, oh, you can't talk to the CMO, only corporate talks to them, and we will let you know what they tell us, that is just unbelievable. I mean, it happened 10 days ago in Europe. I mean,
it's amazing.
It's just amazing. Because setting up, it's not rocket science. It's really getting a core team that knows what they're doing. You pick the qualified people, and as I said before, don't make it a 40, 50 people team, make it a 8 to 12 people. Based on consulting firms, it shouldn't be more than 8 to 12 people that really strategically run the project, and then you have the sub-teams that are executing the tactical aspect of the project, and you will succeed as long as you talk to each other.
Yep, and be aware of, there's anybody who's in late stage, okay? If you're in late stage and this is where you're at, this is where I always call the rubber meets the road. When the guys in the early stage, they tell you how they've done this and they've demonstrated from scale to scale, and you hear them invoke words such as, when they're looking at kinetic data, we're talking blood data, we're talking the big money now, right? And you hear them utter the words that it was not clinically significant. Every red light in your head's got to go off. What that means is they just threw it over the wall. Remember, they worked in plus or minus 30%. And you work in the world of plus or minus 5. And you're heading for 1. Yeah? And the whole world thinks we're heading to, perfection. When I hear that word, and the guy said, well, we're looking at the blood data, and it's like, yep, not clinically significant, which that means is, well, the guy probably won't die, or he will have some sort of a good effect. Okay, but that's not what we had the guy here on biosimilars. If you're in tech transfer, you're in, you got a goalpost. Nobody's going to say, yeah, as long as you get it to the end zone. They're saying not only you got to get it to the end zone, you got to kick it from the 70-yard line, and you got to get it through the goalpost. Oh, and by the way, that goalpost is now 10 yards shorter. That's the key. I can't emphasize that enough when I talk. And again, this is true internally when I worked 30 years at Novartis, and this is true to this day when we consult. With that, thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
Pharmaceutical Processing, in conjunction with INTERPHEX 2016, presents INTERPHEX Live.